Welcome to Fraud on the Farm, a podcast where we examine real cases of fraud within the agricultural industry. I am your host, Joe.
And I am your co-host, Alex.
In each episode of this series, we will look at how these schemes were orchestrated, the red flags that were overlooked, and why these crimes matter so deeply for farmers and the ag industry.
Every case we cover features true stories drawn directly from court records and public reporting. These aren't just paperwork errors, they are often decade-long operations hiding in plain sight. We're starting this series because when fraud enters agriculture, the impact goes far beyond the initial headlines. As we'll see, when the system is exploited, everyone pays the price.
Let's get into the dirt.
Okay, so picture this. It's a random Tuesday. You walk out to your mailbox, expecting bills, maybe some junk mail, the usual. But instead, you pull out an envelope from the U.S. Treasury, and inside is a check for $62,000.
Which is life-changing money for most people.
But here's the really weird part. The memo line says it's for a farm loan discrimination settlement. The thing is, you're not a farmer. You don't own any land. You've never even applied for a USDA loan. And yet, the check is real. Now, imagine that exact thing happening almost 200 times in one small part of Arkansas.
And, this wasn't some kind of sophisticated cybercrime syndicate or a bank glitch.
Not at all. The masterminds behind the scheme, they didn't need the dark web. They used church basements. The architects were four sisters, Linda, Rosie, Deloy, and Brenda, all in their 70s.
The Arkansas Sisterhood. Yeah, it sounds so benign, But this was an $11.5 million criminal enterprise.
So today, we are doing a deep dive into this case. And it's not just about how all of the mechanics are frankly fascinating. We really need to look at the context.
The Bigford settlements. You can't understand the scam without understanding why the door was open in the first place.
Exactly. We're going to unpack how these sisters exploited a system that was actually built for restorative justice and how a whole network of professionals let it happen. And maybe most importantly, why this crime hurt the very people who genuinely needed that help.
That's the real takeaway here. It's so easy to laugh at the granny gang idea, but this was absolutely not a victimless crime. They poisoned the well.
Okay, so let's start there with the context, because the idea of the government just mailing out checks based on an honor system, it sounds insane. Why was the checkbook even open?
You have to go all the way back to the late 90s to a class action lawsuit called Bigford v. Glickman, and then later Pickford II. This was a landmark case. The USDA basically admitted to decades of systemic discrimination against black farmers.
And we're not just talking about being rude. This was destroying livelihoods.
Oh, completely. Denying loans, delaying applications until the planting season was over. It was economic destruction. So the government agrees to a massive settlement, but they immediately hit this huge problem. The paperwork, or the lack of it. A lot of this discrimination happened decades ago. The USDA had destroyed records, and, a farmer from 1985 probably didn't keep a rejection letter. Why would you?
So the government wants to pay, but the proof is just gone.
Exactly. So the court came up with a solution for what they called Track A claims. It was a lower standard of proof. Basically, if you can provide a sworn statement saying, I tried to farm, I applied for a loan, and I was discriminated against, and you had a witness to back you up, you got a check, you qualified for a flat payment, $50,000 plus tax relief, which brought it up to that magic number of around $62,000.
Okay, that makes sense. The system was designed to be forgiving because the government's own bad actions created the lack of evidence.
It was designed to be accessible. But, as we know, in the world of fraud, accessible very quickly becomes exploitable. The key vulnerability was you didn't need the actual denial letter. You just needed the story.
Which brings us right back to the sisters, Linda, Rosie, Delois, and Brenda. They were deeply, deeply embedded in their community.
I mean, if a stranger in a suit offers you a get-rich-quick scheme, you're suspicious. But if it's the nice lady from the supermarket, or the nice lady from the bank, right?
You listen, you trust them. So their recruitment for this, it ran for almost a decade, from 2008 to 2017. What was the pitch? How do you convince someone who has never farmed a day in their life to sign a federal document claiming they were a farmer?
Well, you blur the lines. According to the investigation, they wouldn't ask, were you a farmer? They'd ask something much broader like, did your family ever have trouble with their land? Or Do you think the government owes you for how your parents were treated?
So it's not about a specific personal experience, it's about a kind of ancestral grievance.
Precisely. They framed it as this general pot of money that people were owed for historical injustices, not as a legal claim for a specific loan.
But the forms themselves, they required specifics, right? You can't just write, things were tough.
No, you needed details, dates, acres, what crops you planned to plant. You had to name the specific white farmer who supposedly got the loan you were denied.
And these recruits wouldn't know a soybean from a coffee bean.
Of course not. And that's why the sisters handled everything. This was the concierge part of the scam. They'd interview the person, then they would fill out the entire claim form themselves. They made up the dates, invented the crops, pulled names of loan officers out of thin air.
That is an incredible amount of creative writing for almost 200 claims.
And for the recruits, the process was completely passive. They were often just handed the last
page, the signature page, sign here.
Give us our cut. That was always the deal. When that $62,000 check arrived, the recruit had to hand over a big chunk, usually between $10,000 and $25,000.
So the recruit gets, 40 grand for signing their name, and the sisters get the rest. Everybody's happy for a while.
But the thing that elevates this whole case is that you can't run a scheme this big for this long just by being charming. You need professionals to look the other way.
The enablers.
Exactly. There are supposed to be checkpoints in the system to stop this. The first one is the notary public.
Go show your ID, sign the book, they put the stamp on. It's the most basic level of verification.
Well, in this scheme, the notary completely failed. The sisters would just bring in stacks of documents, some already signed, and the notary would just stamp them. No witnessing, no ID checks, nothing.
That's bad. But what about the lawyers? These claims had to go through a lawyer, didn't they?
And this is where it gets really serious. A licensed attorney was part of this whole pipeline. The lawyer's job was to be a gatekeeper, to review the claim and certify that it seemed legitimate.
So to put their professional license on the line saying, I've checked this out.
Precisely. And in this case, the lawyer just rubber stamped them. We're talking about claims where the farmer was supposedly farming hundreds of acres while living in a city apartment. I mean, one 5-minute conversation would have blown the whole thing up.
So why? Was the lawyer getting a kickback?
It seems like it was just a volume game. In these big settlement cases, lawyers often get paid per claim they process. So if you don't ask any questions, you can process a huge number of claims very, very quickly. It became a conveyor belt.
And they even brought in a tax preparer at the end, right?
They did. That was the last piece. Because when people suddenly start depositing $60,000 checks and pulling out 20 grand in cash, banks notice. They file suspicious activity reports. The tax preparer was there to try and make it all look clean, or at least keep the higher up away for a while.
You have this whole ecosystem of fraud, but still, 192 claims. That's a huge number. How did the USDA not notice that one little corner of Arkansas was apparently the epicenter of farming discrimination?
You'd think so, but you have to remember, the Pigford settlement was massive, tens of thousands of claims all over the country. So 192 in the grand scheme of things is a drop in the bucket, but they got sloppy.
Writing started repeating itself.
It's the problem with fraud at scale. You fall into patterns. The USDA's Office of Inspector General, the OIG, finally started noticing these anomalies. They saw the same identical paragraphs showing up in claims from different people. They saw the same handwriting.
I read they were even using the same addresses.
Yes. Multiple farmers, all claiming to live at the same address or having checks mailed to a P.O. box controlled by the sisters. The patterns just got too loud to ignore.
So the OIG flags it, freezes the payments coming from this pipeline.
And this is the part of the story where the criminals are supposed to run. They're supposed to shred everything and disappear.
But the Arkansas Sisterhood, they didn't do that.
No. And this is the part of the story that it's breathtaking. When the government checks stopped coming, the sisters didn't hide. They sued the USDA.
Wait, hold on. They were running a multi-million-dollar fraud ring. The government caught on and stopped paying them, so they filed a lawsuit against the...
For discrimination. They actually filed a lawsuit claiming the USDA was discriminating against them by denying their fraudulent claims. They tried to use the very civil rights law they were exploiting as a weapon.
I don't even have a word for that.
It's pure hubris, and it is a fatal mistake. By suing, they forced the Department of Justice to defend the USDA's decision.
Means the DOJ had to go out and prove the fraud was real to win the case.
Exactly. It gave the investigators everything they needed. They started interviewing all the so-called farmers. And of course, people started talking immediately. They'd say, "No, I never farmed. Linda just told me to sign here."
Wow. So they basically handed the prosecution a signed confession because they got mad that the free money train stopped.
It's like they had been getting away with it for so long, almost a decade, that they truly believed they were untouchable.
So let's talk about the consequences. The indictments came down in 2019.
Yeah, a massive indictment. Mail fraud, wire fraud, conspiracy, money laundering, tax evasion, the whole 9 yards.
Did it fight it?
For a little while. But the evidence was just crushing. By 2022, every single person involved had pleaded guilty. The sisters, the tax preparer, everyone.
And the sentencing was in 2023. What did they get?
The sisters got sentences around the 2-year mark in federal prison, give or take, plus supervised release.
2 years for $11 million? Some people might hear that and think that's not very much.
Well, you have to consider their age. 2-year sentence for someone in their mid-70s is a very different thing. But the real punishment was the financial part. They're ordered to pay over $9 million in restitution.
Which they'll never be able to pay back.
No, probably not. The money's gone. Spent.
I want to shift to the impact. We started off talking about this as quirky crime story, but you said from the beginning this is not a victimless crime.
It is so important to understand that. It's easy to think, oh, they stole from the government. Who cares? But this wasn't just some random government fund. This was money specifically set aside by Congress to right a historical wrong.
It was money meant for real Black farmers who actually lost everything.
Correct. And the Pigford settlement was a finite pot of money. So every dollar the sisters stole was a dollar that a legitimate claimant could not get. But the real damage, the long-term damage, is what it did to the system itself.
What do you mean? How does a scam in Arkansas hurt a real farmer in, say, North Carolina?
Because of the politics. Even before this, the Pigford settlement was controversial. Critics were already calling it a shakedown, claiming it was full of fraud.
And this case gave them the perfect headline. It proved them right.
It gave them the poster child for fraud. And when a scandal like this breaks, the government's reaction is always predictable. Tighten everything. They don't want red tape? Way more. Stricter proof requirements, more documentation needed, a default position of suspicion.
Which is the original problem. The whole reason for the easier process was because the real victims didn't have the paperwork.
That is the tragedy of this. By exploiting a loophole designed for mercy, the sisters guaranteed that loophole would be slammed shut. So now a legitimate farmer who really was discriminated against has almost no chance because the system now sees everyone as a potential scammer.
It's like a boy who cried wolf effect for an entire group of people who are already on the margins.
It creates what I'd call a skepticism tax. Every honest applicant now has to pay that tax with delays and denials because of what these 4 women did.
That's a heavy thought. It really changes this from a story about a clever scam into a story about a profound betrayal of a community's fight for justice.
That's the real legacy. It's not the 11 million, it's the destruction of trust.
So to wrap this up, what we have is a government trying to do the right thing with an imperfect system, a group of criminals who saw the flaw, and a professional class lawyers, notaries, who just fail to do their jobs.
And it's a powerful reminder that fraud loves complexity and hates friction. The recruits didn't understand the system, so they trusted the sisters. The USDA didn't have the records, so it trusted the lawyers. The entire chain of trust broke.
It leaves me with one final thought. We all complain about bureaucracy, right? The endless forms, the waiting in line, we hate it.
Nobody loves paperwork. The 5th case is
The perfect argument for why some of it exists. It shows you what happens when you remove that friction. The honor system is a nice idea, but in public policy, it seems like it's just an open invitation for a scam.
It's the classic balancing act of governing, isn't it? How much risk are you willing to accept to make sure help gets to the people who need it? In this case, they decided to accept a higher risk to speed things up, and the sisters showed everyone the cost of that decision.
And the worst part is the people who end up paying that cost are the honest ones who are standing in line right behind them.
That's the reality.
That's it for this deep dive. A truly wild story with a very sobering lesson at its core. We'll be back next time. Thanks for listening. Thanks for listening to Fraud on the Farm. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to like, subscribe, and share it with someone who loves a good story. And if there's a case you'd like us to cover, let us know in the comments. Until next time, remember, some of the best dirt isn't found on the field.